welcome to today's episode of How We Got Here. This is a deep dive look at racism in America. My name is Justin Avery. I'm from Waypoint Church here in Santa Barbara. Now, our goal here in this series is to help others identify how racism functions in our society today, because we believe that if you can see it for yourself, you'll be in a much better position to be an advocate against it. Today we tackle the big question: what is racism? Now, fair warning, this study is likely to ruffle some feathers, if it hasn't already. But in my experience, racism discussions are rarely ever comfortable, especially if you're on the right track. So we don't expect everybody to agree, but we are dealing with arguably the darkest corner that we've ever known about American culture. And so, for that reason, we want everybody to know that at the very least, we're taking this absolutely seriously. We're approaching this issue with love, with extreme care, and we're studying history, sociological studies, scriptures, real life experiences, and all to present you with a cohesive understanding and maybe a little bit more of a perspective of what's actually happening in our world. The church needs mastery over these issues in order to lead people through them, and we haven't shown that we're quite there yet. So, this series is our effort to try to help us get there. So we aren't setting church policy, we aren't trying to tell people what to do, but we are here to educate and maybe to push us a little bit more than we're used to think more deeply about this stuff than we historically have on these matters. We're also looking to educate ourselves and to do better. So if you have something to add, please know that the door is open for this discussion. It's the only way we're going to get better. So just let us know in the comments. Contact us through the website or through in the description below. We really, really, really want to know what's on your mind. Having said that, we will open this up with what I call the big lie. Now, in the religious world, the big lie about Satan is that he's this little red man with hooves, horns, a pitchfork. He walks around menacingly. You've seen him in Bugs Bunny cartoons, and you can spot him a mile away if that was true. No one would fall for his schemes if he was that easy to detect. Basically, though, he's been made into this kind of veritable boogeyman in the religious world. And we see that concept being played out from children's cartoons all the way to adult horror films. And it's kind of laughable when we talk about it in the open, but this caricature has really become our sole concept of evil. In other words, as long as you aren't that, you can't be an evil person. As long as you aren't this extreme caricature, you must be doing okay. But according to the Bible, Satan is a master of deception. And it says that his lies are his native tongue. In other words, if the Bible is true, and I believe it is, you wouldn't be able to spot it. He wouldn't look like that caricature at all. He would be just the opposite. He would look safe. He would look attractive. He might even look spiritual. I think he'd look like you could trust him. I think you'd even say he would look as normal as you or me. He might even look like Jesus himself if you knew what he looked like. Jesus taught us that the only way that you can identify an evil presence is by observing the fruit of a person's actions, by the outcome of their behavior. Apple trees don't bear oranges. The fruit, what the tree actually produces will tell you what that tree is and what you can expect from it in the future. In the same way, American culture has kind of constructed the same type of boogeyman, so to speak. That country living, uneducated, gun-toting, truck-driving, America-loving, Confederate flag-flying redneck in American society. You can spot that guy a mile away. And the belief seems to be that as long as you don't look or act like that, there's no way you can be a racist. But I found racism to be far deeper than the caricature. So let's talk about that. What exactly is racism? Well, to truly understand it, I think we're first going to have to be very clear on what it's not. The term racism or racist, is usually understood to describe someone's behavior, like their speech or their writing, or a personal accusation describing the hate that's in a person's character. But let me be very clear. This is not the correct meaning for the word racism. Outside of that, I find that most white people, I'm going to say that term a lot, white people, it doesn't mean I'm against anybody, but I find that most white people don't really know what the term actually means. The correct definition of racism, it doesn't refer to a person, to a behavior, to an event. Neither is racism a feeling or an opinion. Racism refers to a system. So let's talk about what that is. Now, if you look up in Google, what a system is, it'll tell you this. It's two definitions. It says, one, it's a set of components working together as parts of a mechanism or an interconnecting network. And the second one is a set of principles or procedures according to which something is done, an organized scheme or method. So it actually is a plan of action of some sort. It's kind of like a computer, or a program, or a video game, or an app, if you will, where you have countless smaller components all working in concert to deliver a certain outcome on the screen. You're never meant to see what goes on inside to produce it, but it delivers you an experience that adds value to your life. Point is, a system always has a function. It has a purpose. There's something that a system is designed to do. For example, if it was Quicken, its function is to do your finances. If it's Call of Duty, its function is to kill your friends all night. Yeah, that was a lot of fun when we used to do that. But if it's TikTok, it's sharing silly videos and punking politicians or whatever it is that they're doing these days with that thing. It's like an app. Racism is a system, which in this case can be defined as this. It's a set of component societal structures organized to achieve the goal of dominating financial, material, and intellectual resources for the sake of elevating one race over another. You see, it's not hate. It's simply a collection of laws, policies, and cultural norms that serve a very, very specific purpose. People might hate other people, but the system they create to govern themselves is entirely indifferent. All it does is what it was designed to do. See, people say that the American system is broken. It's not broken. It was designed from the ground up to advantage white people while at the same time oppressing people of color. And it's going to perform that task with astounding precision until it's instructed to do otherwise. It's like any other program. Now, let's park right there for a second and let's talk about how we got that system and the system as we know it today. And this is why knowing our history, all of our history, is so critical. The definition of racism changed in our culture at a very specific point in time. It has a pre-civil rights definition and it has a post-civil rights definition. And believe it or not, pre-civil rights, it was socially acceptable for white people to use the term racist to describe themselves positively, even in the North. You see, back then, a racist was what's called a white supremacist, but that was a positive thing. And it was kind of like what American exceptionalism, where it meant they believed in the concept that white people were special. They were better, they were purer, they were superior in every way to black people, though. And they openly supported keeping this social structure intact. Here, you can look at a quote, and it's from Alexander Hamilton Stevens, the vice president of the Confederate Army. And I know they lost, but they really set the tone for what racism would become when he gave this speech back in 1861, about 160 years ago. And he says here, "Our government's foundations are laid. The cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery's subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth. With us, all the white race, however high or however low, rich or poor, all are equal in the eye of the law. But not so with the Negro. Subordination is his place, and he, by nature or by the curse of Canaan, is fitted for that condition which he occupies in our system." Yeah, it sounds crazy, but that was exactly the foundation of racism, what it was to become. And as I mentioned earlier, that every system has a purpose for which it's designed. The purpose of racism, as we see here, the outcome sought by its installation is undeniably white supremacy. The goal was never hate. The goal was to elevate white people above the Negro. And more than that, it was to create a society in which this Negro was made to serve the superior race. So the pursuit of this moral truth, as Stevens called it, led to the violent and bloody and cruel subjugation of an entire race of people. Now, using mass media, the civil rights movement exposed the inhumane and the brutality that the white people were inflicting in order to maintain that social condition. The world saw it with their own eyes and they were disgusted by it. Even most whites were repelled by it. And those horrible images of white people brutally enforcing their will upon black people all over the country, it became the new identity of what a racist looks like in our society, and they didn't like it. Now, white people, they didn't aspire to be that, and when they're seeing it on television like that, the racism definition changed. What once was defined as white Americans to being superior and better and more purer than all other black people, it shifted to mean an individual who consciously does not like people based on their color and is intentionally harmful to them. Now, notice this shift. This is important. It's always an individual rather than a society or a system. It must be conscious and it must be intentional. Now, this new definition cleverly exempted all white people, basically, from the stigma of racism, save for a relative number of people who were willing to do violence in support of white supremacy. The average white person now had a scapegoat. They could point at the television and say with certainty, nope, I am not like that person. But their racist beliefs never changed. They still believed and they still sought the idea of white superiority, and they needed a way to do that without being judged for it. So, in the final analysis, the civil rights movement, it did a lot to change the direction of our society, but it didn't defeat racism. Instead, the events of the civil rights movement actually caused systemic racism to evolve. The guts, you see, when they were televised, the guts of that system were brutally enforcing white supremacy on other people. It was exposed for all the world to see. And there was no way racism could survive in America on the world stage like that with that kind of exposure. So it needed to become something different. Something that would leave white advantage intact while evading the onslaught of disgust from what they saw on television. So the definition of racism went from a violent and unashamed proclamation of white supremacy to an underground movement of sorts, of policies and laws and cultural norms, and it maintained the system's purpose for white superiority, kept that intact while losing the abhorrent stigma that it earned. You see, we saw a lot of things happen in the civil rights movement, but the advantages of being white in a racist system, that never changed. And the desire for those benefits within its people, that never changed. And the idea that white people were superior over black people, that never changed. So the only difference was that they didn't want to be known as the horrible people playing a part in that superior-inferior paradigm. The civil rights movement wasn't the end of racism or white supremacy. It was simply the end of being honest and open about it. You see, there have been countless laws and policies since then, up until current times, that suggest that the goal of white superiority it was then and it's still the purpose of the system. Now, we know that because that's what it's still achieving. You know, the only difference now is that it largely remains unmentioned and obscured from view. You know, the change to the definition of racism in the civil rights era effectively veiled the intentions of white superiority in our system by creating an acceptable scapegoat with which to use as cover so as not to be blamed for it. In other words, I'd be pointing at the TV at the ones saying, oh, those are the racists. So I'm deflecting the social consequences onto them while I over here invoke policies and cultural norms that secure and promote the benefits of my white superiority. It was a brilliant change. So let's fast forward here to 2020. Few white people know this history, and few know that the current definition of racism doesn't really accurately describe what it is. And since it's not taught in schools, they live in a system that does not require them to know. But, white people in society, they still believe that a racist is just a bad person or an evil person in a racial context. So I want to shift your thinking back to the original definition of racism, pre-civil rights, because the current definition of racism is designed never to solve it, but to hide it. And it's been hiding behind that boogeyman scapegoat for 50 years. See, a bad person, they can point to and say, no, I'm not that. So we're good. And we can end the discussion right now. We don't need to talk about it anymore. This concept has been well documented and labeled, in her book called White Fragility. Dr. Robin Diangelo, sociologist, she calls it the good-bad binary. And it refers to the mistake that white people make in assuming that racism has anything to do with good and bad people. And it's a simplistic way that white people see themselves in terms of racism, but it's not simple. But racism is not a simple binary. It's a complex system made up of countless smaller components, as we talked about. And it all serves to support an overall function of the system. And we're all part of the one system. We're either causing it to function or we're being affected by its function. A racist system should be thought more like the inside of a computer, as we talked about. So if you open it up, you'll see hundreds of smaller components that all have a certain task, that they serve that overall function. And of course, the difference here is it's not populated by electrical components or anything like that. It's populated by people. Subsequently, a racist is not defined as a bad person. A racist is a person or it's a component functioning within a racist system that is designed to do bad things. More specifically, a racist is a member of the dominant race who, by their actions, ideas, culture, or intent, supports or reinforces any part of the racist system. And due to the cultural nature of a racist system, support for it can be and often is unwitting. In other words, people, it's possible to be a racist, a component of that system, without even knowing it. You just live in your life as you do every day. Some functions within the system play more of a consequential role than others, but every part of the system is contributing to that final product, to white supremacy. And all you have to do to support a system is to obey its rules. And every rule of a racist society is in place in order to secure white superiority. So to live a normal life in a racist system produces exactly that. And to that end, racism doesn't require your permission. It doesn't require your awareness. It doesn't require your understanding of its presence in order to proliferate within your life. It can function very effectively under your radar, regardless of how many black friends you have, the neighborhood you grew up in, regardless of the fact that you've experienced hate from other races, whether you belong to an interracial family, you married to a minority, or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Despite what many white people believe to be exculpatory credentials, you could still be racist. Someone who knowingly or unknowingly, by his actions, ideas, culture, or intent, reinforces any part of that system. If you're white in America, you were born into a system that was constitutionally designed for your advantage at the cost of black people. We're talking laws, policies, cultural norms you inherently benefit from right now in a way that's not offered to black people. And it's so normal and so pervasive that most people can live within it their entire life and never even notice its presence. It is so deep, it takes study to truly understand how networked into the American psyche racism actually is. You were trained to adhere to its norms long before you were old enough to even have a choice. There are studies that prove that. Participation on any level is the only qualifier to be one. So no, a racist does not mean a hateful or a bad person. It means that you're a component functioning within a system that you were born into and taught to do. I'm saying that if you are white in America, you are a racist by the truest definition of the term. Now, I know it sounds harsh, sounds menacing, judgmental, and unforgiving thing to say, and it would be that way if it meant what most white people think that it means, which is a bad person. Still, it's not a compliment. And I'm pretty good with words, but I can't spin this into a pretty bit to swallow. I'm fully aware of the defensiveness that some people will take to what I've said here. So let's talk about it openly, Why do I believe that it's important to say that and to put it in those terms? Well, for example, let's take the term off the table. Let's not use that word. The circumstance that I've just described to you in detail is still a reality. So what would you call it? What's the name for a person who falls under that description? See, I think you'll quickly find the same problem that I did, that every other name that you can come up with sounds like nothing more than putting an unhealthy coat of sugar on it. Guys, it is what it is.
If any white person listening to us right now and is holding the mainstream idea that only, racism is committed by people wearing white hoods, then it's going to sound offensive if I say, of course you're racist, right? And I agree. If that's what I thought it meant to be racist, that would be an offensive thing to say. All of the racism I've perpetrated in my life has been neither conscious nor intentional, but has wounded others nonetheless. Do I want to know that? This is where the humility comes in. Would you not want to know? Would you not care to receive that so that you understood and could do different or do better? But this kind of, it couldn't be me, actually functions as a kind of arrogant refusal to know.
Before anybody can change a social condition, they must first own their responsibility for the part they play in it. Culturally speaking, white people never have. You've never owned that. And I'm pushing you right now, as a white person, I'm pushing you to own it. And I'm making the case why you should. See, the majority of people who stand up against racism are not white people. Those would be people of color. But let's be clear, don't be deceived. Racism is not a black problem. Let me repeat that, it's not a black problem. Racism is a white problem created by white people, and only white people have the power in this country to uncreate it. And if you're a white person and you think racism is wrong and you have any desire to change it, you must first own your role in it. Because that is specifically what you'll have to change in order to change racism. I know you didn't start it, and I know that's not fair. But fairness is not a privilege that responsible people have the luxury of. Responsible people, they do what's necessary because we know if we don't, nobody else will. So we need to work through this defensiveness so that we can get there. And we get there by understanding why white defensiveness is so strong against the statement, you are a racist. It's primarily due to a limited understanding of the term itself. Like we talked about it, it's even after a lengthy explanation, you might find yourself still asking, how can I be racist when I don't hate anybody? I don't hate anyone. This is that good-bad binary in action. We've been socialized to believe incorrectly about racism, so it's going to take some time and some repetition to nail this down. So write it down, commit it to memory, but memorize this statement. And I'm going to put it up here. Racism is not hate. It describes the system you live in and your participation in it.
I'm looking at the camera now, and I'm going to ask white people to remove the claim, I'm not racist, from your vocabulary. Remove it. It's functionally meaningless. It doesn't convince Black people. Check me there if I'm wrong. When you hear a white person say I'm not racist, you're likely actually thinking the opposite. Clueless. This person doesn't understand racism. This person's going to deny my reality. And if you're reeling, why on earth would she tell me to remove I'm not racist from my vocabulary? This is a place where the humility comes in. My learning will never be finished, but I likely have more experience and study in this area than most white people who are listening. And if I'm telling you to do that, then probably you're missing something, not me. So there's another area you want to educate yourself in. Why are people saying that? That's counter to to the paradigm I have. And we're here to tell you the paradigm you have is set up to protect racism.
See, you have to let that post-civil rights definition of racism go. It's not correct. The most productive question to ask here is whether knowingly or unknowingly, what role do I play in a system that produces white superiority? You see, Dr. Diangelo explains that the good and bad binary is at the root of white defensiveness. When white people are associated with the term racist, they understand that it means bad people. And that's an attack on their moral character. And this distracts from the real issue, which is the system. And it has us wasting energy scapegoating individuals for thinking that they're the hateful ones or whatever. The good and bad binary is meaningless because it sets up this false notion of your role in society. There are no good and bad people. It's just people. And they do good and they do bad things from time to time. But at the end of the day, good and bad is irrelevant. Either way, you are still functioning part of a system designed to create an environment of white supremacy. And that has to be addressed. Pretty much everything you've come to understand about the human experience since birth was taught to you from a white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal frame of thinking. That is our system. I was taught that way too. And as a white person, though, you have a choice to make. You can either deny and ignore that while still receiving the advantages that it provides to you, or you can pursue the issue, learning what role you may have been playing in it, and maybe find a way to undo that. Being born into a racist system, it doesn't make you a bad person. If it were possible to be a bad person, let me describe to you what that might look like, okay? When you step on somebody's foot, and then you're made aware that you stepped on their foot, a good person would say, "Excuse me, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean that." And then upon their forgiveness, you would proceed to do whatever you could to not let that happen again. A bad person would look you square in the face and tell you that nothing happened. They would deny any responsibility, and they'd just, brush you off and say, "Get out of here, man." Even as you still felt the pain in your foot from that event. You see, that's the experience that Black people have had for decades, generations, is being denied that it ever even happened. Denial of your role here, it makes you powerless to change society for the better. And it guarantees the protection of the white supremacy society insofar as your role that you play in it. Only when you own the role that you play in it will you be in a position to actually make a difference to change it, but not a minute before. Now, we stated earlier that racism is not a good-bad binary. It's a system, much like the inside of a computer. And we're all part of it, whether we want to be or not, or whether we are aware of it even or not. Some of us affect it, while others of us are affected by it. And the only prerequisite to being a part of it is obeying its rules, its laws, its social norms. And there are many ways to function within this system to produce a white superiority outcome. And we're going to look at a few of them here. We asked earlier the question, how could I have played a role in a racist system to produce white superiority? It's a very good question. It's the one we should be asking. This is the part where we explain it. And the first type of racism that we're going to explain is the most obvious one. It's the caricature that we were describing earlier. It's what I call the overt racists. These are the hateful, violent ones. They're pretty self-explanatory due to their anger, due to their hate or whatever, because of, due to what they feel about other people of different colors. They're willing to be violent. And then the second one is the white supremacists. Now, they're not necessarily hateful, but it usually will involve hate. But they demonstrate this drive to intentionally create this superiority and inferiority social dynamic. They tend to love racial purity. And these days, in 2020, we see them. They're trying to start race wars. Then the third one is the circumstantial racist. Now, they've had a bad experience with someone from a different race at some point in their lives. And that experience impacted their thinking towards an entire group of people. So those are the overt racists. And then you have what I call the closet racists. Now, there's three kinds. And the first is the political racist. Now, they don't admit to racism, yet they enact social, financial, and housing legislation and other kinds of policies that support racist and white supremacist ideologies to the end of benefiting white superiority. So they use policy to defend that. The second is executive racist. Now, there's an unstated executive level business hiring practice in America. So just notice, if you take a look at any company, notice the majority of the executive branch of this business is white. Now, that's not an accident, and I can't say exactly what kind of racism that is, but the outcome of their behavior is clear for all to see. It's white superiority in action. And whatever you want to call it, at the end of the day, white superiority is the product. Now, there's cultural racists. Now, they see black people as an inherent threat to their way of life. Now, they claim not to hate black people, but they don't trust them with power, they don't trust them with responsibility, and they don't trust them with proximity. They're not comfortable with black people living in their neighborhoods, being in a position of power over white people, or marrying their children, for example. They'll cross the street when they see a black person walking at night. That's actually happened to me a number of times. These are those people who fear black people with no defined reason as to why. Now, the next category are what I call the opportunists. Now, the first opportunist is what I call the practical racist. Now, this is the type of closet racist that they claim not to hate anyone, but the benefits that the racism provides and the superiority that it secures and the opportunities that it opens for them are too good not to take advantage of. I mean, who wouldn't, right? You know, even though the opportunities are only available to them because of the color of their skin, opportunity is opportunity. So they navigate effectively within the system to their own benefit. And to them, Black oppression that results from that occurs just in the process of their success. It's a necessary means to an end. And to them, it's not so much about race as it is about business. Now, the second kind is what I call personal racism. Whiteness has power. The very color of one's skin exclusively opens doors, irrespective of skill, talent, or merit. You are given authority, especially if you're a man, to enact your will in society where other people of color can't. It's very seductive. And the power is used in many forms and in many areas of life. It's not always just business. Sometimes it's simply personal gain or even revenge. An extreme example of this we just saw recently this summer in this confrontation in Central Park where a white woman, her name was Amy Cooper, she called the police on a black man in order to use her whiteness against him to get him falsely arrested or worse. You know, she lied to the police and told them that there was a black man attacking her, and in truth, all he did was ask her to leash her dog, as is stipulated in the park rules. You know, it was all captured on video, and thankfully she failed, but her attempt was a common one, and it was broadcast in real time for all to see. You know, she used her whiteness as a weapon against him. Note that in her apology letter, if you look it up, she claimed not to be racist. Now, opportunists are quick to use the tools of racism for their benefit while denying the presence of any racism in their hearts. And I think they truly believe this about themselves. Because for them, it really does seem to be a means to an end. You know, most of the time it works, and Black people have lost their lives because of this recklessly wielded white power. Emmett Till was one of them, and his brutal murder was the catalyst for the civil rights movement. The entire movement started with his murder, and he was killed because of a white woman telling a similar lie, which she finally incidentally confessed to at age 82 to the New York Times, that she lied. You know, people who do this are unquestionably racists, just not overt ones. And in their minds, they appear to make a distinction between opportunistic behavior and blatant overt racism. Yeah, they have different behaviors and motivations. However, both contribute to a system of white supremacy, and it results in the oppression of Black people. And to that end, there is no difference. They're all racists. They're just different kinds of racists. Now, the other category I call the unwitting beneficiaries. Now, the unwitting beneficiaries, they're those who enjoy the benefits of living in a racist system and adhere to its rules, but aren't entirely aware of how they got those benefits, or who it hurt in order to provide it, or whose rights were stolen in order to secure theirs. They often mistakenly take it for granted that their benefits are what everyone, including Black people, must enjoy. You know, many times this ignorance is intended, though. It's kind of an out of sight, out of mind, plausible deniability type of situation. A convenient ignorance, if you will. The less you know, the better. So many look the other way, and it allows one to enjoy the benefits of living in a racist system, but not be accountable or feel guilty for its existence. They're just as happy to go along, mind their own business, and earn whatever they can in the system. Now, the second kind of unwitting beneficiary is what I call the ignorant racists. Now, they have no idea of the extent of their racism. Many times they're simply just doing what they're used to doing, or imitating what they see others around them doing, or what their family did, or you know, whatever's happening around them. And because the way it's always been is normal to them, you know, this type of person might be quick to deny racism exists in a certain situation simply because no one's ever told them otherwise. You know, and some may argue that common sense should take hold here, that they should be able to know the difference, but that would be false, because many people govern their lives simply by what their society does, right or wrong. They just do it because everybody else is doing it. So as you can see, there are many, many forms of racism. Some are unintentional, but your intentions are irrelevant, because racism is not determined by your intentions, but by your participation in supporting a system. One's behavior either supports it or it doesn't. So in light of this, the most healthy, productive, and humble question for a white person to ask in America is this: in what ways might have I contributed to, supported, or taken advantage of living in a racist system? You see, the answer to that question will determine the type of racism and the degree to which you've been involved in it. And the second question is equally important. What steps must I take to stop contributing to that system? Now, the answer to that will be the exact same answer that changes our system forever. And I might add that you probably don't want to trust yourself with accurately answering these questions. As we've discussed, white Americans are kind of known for having legendary amounts of denial, ignorance, and self-deceit when it comes to racial self-awareness. So I recommend ask a black friend to help you out when they see you participating in it. They'll know, and they'll tell you if you ask. So just bear in mind, though, that we're not here to blame white people and try to make people feel guilty. That's not what we're doing here. Your guilt doesn't produce what we need. While it's an understandable response, guilt and shame, that kind of thing, it's unnecessary and unhelpful emotions in this situation. The only time I think somebody should feel guilty here is if they have no intention of dismantling the system, that they somehow intend on keeping their benefits at the cost of black suppression. In that case, you should feel guilty because you're doing wrong. No, what's needed at this moment is very practical. If you're white in America, we need you to take an honest look at it, first and foremost, and then decide if that's the kind of person you want to be. And if it's not, then stop playing a role. Figure out how you can put an end to that. And maybe help others see it too. That right there would change the world. Like I said, we believe that if you can see it for yourself, you'll be a better advocate against it. Hopefully now you know why. And to that end, we laid before you what we know. We're not telling people what to do. We're just ordinary people sharing a bit of history and a bit of perspective. We don't expect everybody to agree with what we said, and I certainly don't expect I've got everything right 100% of the time. But what I do hope for is a discussion. And with respect, with love, let's talk more. We need to talk more in order to work through this. And we're aware that we can always be better and we can always learn something more or something new about this. So let this series be an initiation of a much long needed discussion. So that's our discussion for today. We hope that this better prepares you for the task of making a better world. I know it's a lot to chew on. So please feel free to reference the text in the discussion below. And don't forget to like and share this discussion with your friends. So until next time, I love you. We'll talk soon.